Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you all enjoyed your party last night. I've got this prepared speech, but after those kind words, I feel it should come from the heart. Fortunately, a man visiting a farm met the local shepherd. He goes up and says, "I bet you a sheep that I can tell you exactly how many you have." The shepherd, thinking he will never guess correctly, as he has hundreds of them, says, "Okay." The man says 847, which the shepherd's surprise is the exact number. The shepherd, to mitigate his loss, says, "I bet I can tell you what career you have." The man duly accepts the bet, and the shepherd says, "You're an economist working for the Remain campaign." The man says, "Wow, how did you know that?" The shepherd says, "When I get my dog back, I'll tell you." Seldom in any referendum has so much nonsense been talked by so many people. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor, the BBC, the Financial Times, the head of the IMF, President Obama, and virtually every economist who wanted to get his name in a newspaper would have had you believe that the British economy would be plunged into recession, house prices would collapse, interest rates would rise, the stock market would fall, and indeed, we might even have World War III. Pensions would also be cut, along with an emergency budget, to tax just about everyone. The National Health Service would collapse. No doubt it's an Egyptian-style plague spread across the country. Okay, I made that up, but... Business confidence. So what's the reality? Business confidence had a poor run in July. Hardly surprising, given the doom and gloom prophecies propagated by the Remain campaign. But manufacturing activity rose in August by more than any time in the last 25 years. The Procurement and Supply Index soared in August to 52.9 versus 47.4 in July, indicating strong prospects for economic growth. Even the Evening Standard, another Remain doom and gloom merchant, had to admit in a headline, UK set to duck Brexit recession as services soar. Things weren't so bad. The IMF has expressed surprise that its forecast for recession was so wrong. But of course, we all need to remember that the IMF was recently criticized by its own governing body for its lack of impartiality to the European project. I doubt anyone in this room wishes Mrs. Lagarde, the head of the IMF, any luck with her trial in France for negligence over a fraudulent payout of EU 405 million to a Paris businessman. Average house prices rose by 8.3% in the 12 months to end July, an increase of 0.4% for the month. Industry experts expect further growth throughout the balance of the year. The stock market, not just the major international companies, but British-based businesses too, have hit new records, and of course interest rates have fallen. Employment rose in the last 3 months to July, up 174,000 to an all-time record of 31.77 million. Job vacancies in August rose by 3,000 to 752,000. Employers remain ready to hire. As for World War III, well, Europe is being invaded by economic migrants, which thanks to Brexit, will be better served to protect our borders. How could Cameron and Osborne get it all so wrong? No doubt they're finding solace from the UKIP tie Nigel sent as a retirement present. Since Brexit, the EU is showing its true colours with a vengeance. The unforeseen implications for business, had we stayed, couldn't have been worse. The EU is trying to charge Apple a staggering 17 to 18 billion, including interest, as they feel Ireland does not charge the proper rate of corporation tax. Corporation tax was meant to be a matter for individual governments. Well, not anymore. So, how long before European tax harmonisation on all taxes? Corporation tax in the major EU countries is approximately 33%. In the UK, it's 18% and falling. Social charges paid by employers are all over the place. France, for example, charges 60%. Germany's 34%, in the UK it's 14%. VAT is payable on food in most European countries. As always, any setback in Europe is an excuse for more Europe. And in this case, tax harmonization is inevitable, in my opinion. British businesses had a lucky escape. But that's not the only lucky escape. The European economies are trapped in a deflationary spiral with no economic growth. Unemployment is twice that of the United Kingdom. Youth unemployment in southern Europe is over 40%. This despite the European Central Bank printing trillions of euros. The Italian banking system is in crisis. In my estimation, it would take something in the region of 100 billion of new equity to resolve the problem without having to make pensioners sacrifice their savings in bonds in Italy, which I suspect would cause even further hatred for the European project. But don't think the German banking system's any better. They have a large number of banks owned by states, and many of them are bankrupt. Deutsche Bank itself is reeling from endless problems, not least of all yesterday being fined 14 billion by the US government for selling bad mortgages in the United States. To put that in context, the bank is only worth 20 billion in the stock market. But if you think that's bad, they have derivative exposures, which is probably a bit too complicated to explain here, of 54 trillion euros. If they were to get the pricing wrong by 1%, Deutsche Bank would be wiped out 7 times over. So what are the implications for the British business community over the coming years? As I'm not an economist, I might have a chance of getting it right, but who knows? The question is, of course, very wide, so I'll try to paint a picture with a broad brush. Inflation is going to rise. Imported goods will cost approximately 10% more. On top of this, a large number of businesses will need to pass on the impact of the minimum wage. After the Brexit tidal wave of immigrants driving down the wages of ordinary British people will be curtailed. A Cameron legacy, which he won't be talking about, is under the coalition. The average wage in the United Kingdom fell from £28,000 per annum to £23,000. What a total disgrace for hard-working British people. Business will therefore need to improve productivity to offset higher costs. Across business sectors, I believe the overall impact will be very positive, but of course there will be winners and losers. One of the principal benefits of Brexit is that companies, particularly smaller companies with no exports to Europe, will be freed from a tidal wave of endless and expensive EU legislation and regulations. Obviously, companies exporting into the EU will have to meet EU standards. But the argument that because we can't influence those standards makes British business vulnerable is a nonsense. Our exporters to the United States, for example, have to meet their manufacturing standards, and it goes without saying we have no influence over America either. As regards the different parts of our economy, let me share with you some brief comments on various sectors. Tourism into the UK will be a major beneficiary of Brexit. The cheap pound will make Britain a prime destination for foreign tourists. European threats on visa charges will make staycation even more attractive, and already British people increasingly plan a holiday in the United Kingdom. This in turn will benefit leisure-related businesses, soccer, 10-pin bowling, restaurants, hotels, and other leisure-related activities. Better reserve your place on the beach before the Germans arrive. House building outside London, which is something of a special case, will continue to prosper. The government is committed to greater home ownership through various incentives, while the massive housing deficit caused by previous immigration means it will take at least a decade before the UK housing market reaches equilibrium. Exports of both services and manufactured products will obviously need to meet EU manufacturing standards, but with a 10% decline in sterling, Their products are increasingly competitive against our European competitors. The Japanese car manufacturers in the United Kingdom should be rejoicing rather than bullying our Prime Minister. Their competitive position and profitability has improved dramatically as a result of Brexit, but of course, these are the same companies who demanded we join the euro. As we all know, that would have been a disaster for our nation. Enter our former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, God help us, who would have joined the euro and demands another referendum, as he doesn't seem to believe in the democratic rights of the British people. Wrong then, wrong now. Financial services are obviously a very important part of our economy. We have a manufacture-trade deficit with Europe of circa 140 billion, but a significant surplus in financial and other surpluses of probably 80 billion per annum. We will need to use that deficit to protect our financial and other services, but even then the story is not one-sided. Banking. Most British banks are selling their loss-making European retail banking businesses. No great loss there. Insurances. Large companies such as Aviva have European subsidiaries, so Brexit is not a threat. Lloyd's Insurance claims it will be hurt, but that refers only to a very small proportion of its business in the European Union. Lloyd's is predominantly an excessive loss catastrophe business which competes against Bermuda and Switzerland, neither are EU members. The fund management industry, which is enormously profitable for the United Kingdom with over 4 trillion under management, is largely unaffected, although they may need to set up small businesses in Ireland to secure EU distribution. Finally, don't be fooled by investment banks reducing their UK operations. Most investment banks are failing to earn an adequate return on capital. So Brexit is a perfect excuse for downsizing their business, which they intend to do anyway. Don't fall for that little lie. In any event, the UK is signing up to MiFID II, which will give passporting rights to all UK financial institutions into the EU. Industries that will be hurt include retailers, supermarkets, which will find it hard to pass on higher import costs in a highly competitive market. Energy costs are also likely to rise over the medium term unless the government gets on with fracking for oil and gas. In fact, the biggest impact on British business was, surprise, surprise, self-imposed by Mr. Carney. His hasty decision to reduce interest rates by 0.25% has had a very negative impact on companies with large pension deficits. Banks and insurance companies' profits will be impacted as interest margins decline and investment returns are curtailed. Needless to say, that will also hit a lot of retired working people who have their savings earning absolutely nothing. How disgraceful is that? Obviously, our Prime Minister will be overseeing the negotiations rather than Nigel, without whom none of this would have been possible. We can only hope she has the strength to deliver on her promises and the wishes of the majority of the British people and overrule the political elite who want to undermine the Brexit process at every turn. In conclusion, the British economy is open for business. We can now negotiate deals for the benefit of the UK with America, China, India, and a host of countries where the EU has singly failed. British business can look forward to the future with confidence. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
We are ahead of time. Would you take a couple of questions? Just say two.
Yes, okay.
We are, unusually for a UKIP conference, way ahead of time. And the next, which is the medals, gold medals awards, cannot start until past. So I'm going to take a couple of questions for Christopher on business specific. We're not going to generalize. If you have a question, please just give a question, not a long speech. There's somebody in the back there.
Can you tell me, is there anything in the future about low-cost housing, social housing and building houses which we desperately need and which the government haven't done for, well, I say 50 years? Thank you.
Well, the government aren't going to be doing that. They talk about it, but they aren't going to be doing that. One of the fundamental, it so happens, quite a good question for me, because I'm a director of a company called MJ Gleeson, which has substantial business in the north of England, and we are an affordable housing company, and we sell houses for about £115,000, which, given the entry level, is something that most people can afford. Even a three-bedroom house is only £125,000. The fundamental problem with the British housing industry at the moment is there's a capacity issue. It is very difficult to build more than about 150,000 houses a year, given brick supplies, labor, etc. And one of the other problems you've got is, unlike Gleeson, who is building many more homes at the moment, many of the big house builders were very scared after the last recession. Many of them nearly went bankrupt, and therefore they are containing their building activities so they don't overstretch themselves. The corollary of that being is you see these absurd bonuses paid to housing chiefs of Persimmon and Berkeley Homes, where they feel they're now worth £10 million a year as an annual salary. So I'm afraid it's very hard to give you much encouragement that the big house builders are going to be building much affordable housing. Now, the government does force them to build some affordable housing as part of their overall schemes. But again, the unfortunate truth is the demand is considerably greater than the supply. And of course, in the southeast, it's pretty well impossible. In fact, there's some horrendous statistics. If you were to take London, a first-time buyer in London, central London, is now 52 years old. In the surrounding area of London, he's now, or she is now 47 years old. This is hardly a way to support Margaret Thatcher's housing dream. Did that answer your question?
Right. We've got one in the back there and then one here, and I don't think we'll get much. That gentleman in the back?
Christopher Gill, honorary president of the Freedom Association. We're constantly being told that getting out of the European Union is very complicated and it's going to take a long time. Can you, Christopher, see any objection to our government going to Brussels and saying to them over there, look, we're out. Do you understand? By saying we are prepared to continue trading with you on the same basis that we're trading now. Is that what you want or not?
That's exactly what any normal thinking person would indeed be saying. Sadly, of course, our civil servants are going to tie this up with how many angels on a pinhead. The trouble with trade is you have to meet certain EU standards. Those standards have to be achieved, and therefore it's not as simple as simply saying Britain is a free trade area with no import taxes. We can, and I'm sure we will get there, even if we have to borrow some of New Zealand's negotiators, because we obviously gave up negotiating for ourselves a long time ago. So there was another question over there.
Yes, that gentleman there was next.
Mercedes, I'm not making out on them. Give me 2 stocks or shares and I
Fortunately, the Financial Conduct Authority doesn't allow me to do that. Otherwise, I'd probably be in an awful lot of trouble in my next visit to you next year. Please.
Right. Sorry.
There's lots of very interesting information you gave out there. Too much to take in at once. Is that all your speech going to be put on the webline for us to see?
I'm sure we could do that.
I'm sure, yes. Especially.
The Deutsche Bank information.
Yes, the trouble with that was I just happened to know that in my head. So all you'll see is it just says Deutsche Bank and Italian banking system.
Well, if we can get some of it added in, I'm sure we can do.
Yes.
Thank you.
Or obviously, I think you'll find this speech is being put on YouTube, hasn't it? So well, you could get it from there.
Right. There was somebody in the middle here that was waving. This will have to be the last one. You'll have to speak up a little bit.
Oh, God, yes. I was afraid someone might ask that question. They'll teach me for using acronyms. The question is, what does MiFID II passporting rights mean? Basically, very simplistically, under MiFID II, if a financial institution can be shown to meet all the requirements of the European Union, it can trade in the European Union even if that country is not a member of the European Union. It would be extremely difficult for the European Union to argue that we can't meet their financial requirements and standards, because we are obviously having to meet them as we speak. So that's the way you get around it.
Okay.
Oh, it's a European Union piece of legislation. It's a horrible thing for many British institutions because it increases our cost base exponentially by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds for small companies.
Right. Thank you. Christopher, thank you. We've got to get on to our next part.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And as